welcome. Please come join us at the front wherever you can find a spot. Welcome to CSI. Welcome to tonight's climate edition, debate, town hall, conversation, opportunity to connect. I just want to acknowledge that we have real humans in the room. I couldn't be more excited. Stefan, do you want to give us a sense of, have we got some people in the virtual world as well?
We do. We're joined by 48 folks in the virtual world. So welcome to everyone.
Fabulous. So I'm going to do the unthinkable. I'm going to put on my reading glasses. But first I will just say, welcome to CSI. My name is Tanya Sermon. I'm the founder and CEO of the Center for Social Innovation. And this is the first debate town hall that I've ever moderated. So please bear with me if I suck. But I have really, really wonderfully supportive compatriots here who are going to help make it excellent. So, welcome to CSI. CSI is a social enterprise, a community, and a collaborative workspace for people and organizations that are working to make the world a better place. CSI has been profoundly affected by COVID, and we want to remind you all that we are now safely open to host your in-person and hybrid events. Our workspaces are available to big and small organizations, a day a week, a drop-in, and every single day. CSI is a beautiful escape from the chaos of your home. Yeah, I said that. And the world, and a place to focus, connect, work, create, and transform the world. We welcome you to learn more about CSI's offerings. Here at the front desk, there's a little bit more information. But tonight, we're hosting this event because we care deeply about people and planet. We're tired of polarizing issues, zero-sum games, and how politics distorts the nuance behind the solutions that are possible. This is our first attempt at a hybrid event. Thank you, Emil and Elvira, for pulling this amazingness together. Thank you, thank you. We're hosting this event because we care deeply about the impact of climate change on all of our relations. We have been doing our part with our Climate Ventures Accelerator, which has supported the growth of 139 early-stage social ventures, climate ventures, that have now earned and raised over $100 million since founding in 2018. We are hosting this event because we feel passionate about the need to become and support the courageous leaders who are willing to step up, step out, and take a risk in the political arena. We are also hosting this event for our children, our children's children, for all of the diversity of species that don't have a voice, for the whales, the owls, the fungi, the trees, the air, the soil, and for all of the complexity of life that we call nature that sustains our every and very existence on this planet. I'm going to turn the show over very briefly to my co-host, Stefan Hochstadler, who will do a small land acknowledgement.
Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for being here. For those who don't know, my name is Stefan Hochstadler. I'm the Director of Community at CSI Savannah, and I use he pronouns. Those of us who work in Toronto, and the two locations we do have here in Toronto, sit on the traditional territories of the Haudenosaunee, the Huron-Wendat, the Toon, and most recently the Mississaugas of the Credit. And for those of us here at CSI, one of the important questions we hold to ourselves is, how can we live up to the original treaty of this land, which was, of course, the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt Covenant. Well, even before the Wampum Belt Covenant, the Dish with One Spoon dates back at least into the 1100s, if not before. And that concept was really all about creating a shared hunting ground, or a place where we can share, not just for those of us who are around us, and not just between different nations, but also for future generations as well. And those of us who, CSI sort of came together with this question of what would happen if we shared. And I think this debate is really in part, and as Tanya even mentioned in our introduction, in regards to this question of how best do we keep this land shareable for our future generations. And so I would ask, and I think that for those of us here at CSI, and I think all of us here, I think keeping that question close at heart is, how do we live up to that original treaty, I think is one that's deeply important. Thanks for all of you being here, and I pass it back to you. Tony.
Thank you, Stefan, and welcome to all the people who are both in real life and who are on our virtual feed. My job is to provide the introduction and also to explain the agenda and format. So just briefly, I'll just say that candidates from all four parties were invited to attend tonight's conversation. Also to acknowledge that Diane has an elderly parent at home to participate virtually, and we are doing everything in our power to make sure that she has equal voice in this conversation as we all experiment with how that looks. Also, just to explain the timekeeping, ladies, you all, I'm sure, can runneth off at the mouth, as I certainly can. Each candidate will have a maximum of 2 minutes to respond, and then I will unceremoniously cut you off. I will. And I got a really big voice, So we'll also attempt, if I can keep myself organized, to rotate who leads in their answer first so that we have some balance. We will also, Stefan and I are going to attempt to balance the conversations and the feedback at the end between the virtual and the physical spaces. So always welcome to constructive criticism after tonight's session about how we might do that more effectively. So, first of all, I just want to say, I have to say I was quite struck by the extraordinary women who are running as candidates for University-Rosedale. Thank you, I'm really screwing up. Yes, right? Amazing. I know. There's no question that every single one of these women should be representing and leading at somewhere in this province, this country, this city. We think you're all just ridiculously amazing, and I feel the richness of Toronto, and I'm so damn proud. So, women, you rock. So let me first introduce Jessica Bell, the incumbent, the candidate for the NDP. Jessica has served as the MPP for this riding since 2018. Has been a local champion advocating for better schools, affordable homes, safe streets for kids and seniors, and a green NDP deal to take bold action on climate change and protect our future. Jessica Bell was endorsed by a nonpartisan organization, Green PAC, in the 2018 provincial election for her leadership on environmental issues. Welcome, Jessica.
Hi, thank you.
I'd next like to introduce Diane Sachs, the candidate for the Green Party. Diane is one of Canada's most respected environmental lawyers. She ran an environmental law boutique that was actually based out of CSI, I admit it, for 25 years, and was the Environmental Commissioner of Ontario from 2015 to 2019, reporting to the legislature on the environment, energy, and climate. Diane now heads Sachs Facts, focusing on the climate crisis. Welcome, Diane. I'm doing something wrong with the thing, right? Keep the receiver like this. Yeah? Okay. Thanks, team. And next, I'd like to introduce Andrea Barrack, a candidate for the Liberal. Andrea is a mom, a community leader, and a seasoned executive who spent her entire career disrupting the status quo, leading change that matters, and getting results for people and our communities. Most recently at TD Bank, Andrea led the design of their climate action plan and improved their philanthropic contributions to deliver greater impact in the communities that they serve. Welcome, Andrea. All right, shall we begin? Yeah. So I'm going to try to watch the time, but you know what? Maybe, Ella, you can help me with the timekeeping a little bit. Maybe a little bit? Okay, I'm going to do it myself too. So, there are concerns that in our commitment to human health during this pandemic, we may not have paid enough attention to the climate crisis at hand. This town hall discussion will focus on Ontario's role in fighting climate change and moving toward a regenerative, circular economy for all. So question number one, when was the last time you went for a walk in nature? Where was it? And describe your relationship with nature. And Jessica, I'm going to start with you.
Thank you. Thank you to also Diane and Andrea for being here. It's fun being a candidate, but elections are very stressful as well, so we get to share that together. The last time I walked in nature, it was during the winter. I have 2 children. We live in an apartment, so we like to get out as much as possible. And we regularly visit a place called Silent Lake. It's a provincial park about an hour south of Bancroft, and it's just beautiful. And my connection to nature, it's hard to describe. I grew up in a big city like Toronto. I grew up in Melbourne, Australia. And then I didn't actually start camping and going outdoors until I moved to California. So I'd say that it's a recent love, but it's also very important. And it's also been important to make sure that my kids connect with nature as well.
Mm-hmm. Great. Thank you for modeling brevity, clarity, and inspiration.
I love it.
I'll turn it over to you, Andrea.
It's a high bar. So my last walk in nature was luckily this morning. I have a dog, and I'm fortunate to live in close proximity to one of the ravine trails in Toronto. And actually, I feel like our ravine and trail system is one of the greatest assets that our city has. And I've had Diego since about 2013, and so we've been walking daily during this time because he's a 90-pound dog and needs some exercise. But what was interesting to me is during COVID in 2020, all of a sudden the trails and the ravine system filled with people who had never been there before. And they were different people, all diverse backgrounds, ages, people with varying abilities. And what's amazing to me is to this day, they still come. I mean, back in 2020, we couldn't actually be physically distanced even down in the ravine. It was so crowded. But that's one of the silver linings that COVID has had. You know, I grew up in rural Ontario. I was lucky to be close to a river, so we got to swim and do various activities. My mom was a teacher and had summers off, so I think, have camped most of the provincial parks in Ontario. And then, you know, when I had my family, we camped a lot, both because we love nature and also because it was affordable. And so I think that connection is very strong with me. Like Jessica, I love living in urban environments now, but if I take a vacation, it's always somewhere natural, because that truly is where I can feel restored.
Beautiful. Thank you. And Diane?
Well, my answer is a lot like Andrew's, except that my dog is 11 pounds. Yes. So I'm walking a dog several times a day, and getting into nature is tremendously important. Although I will say I had 3 days of cross-country skiing and snowshoeing in Algonquin Park in February. That was my only break from the last long period of time. But I became an environmental lawyer and has devoted my entire life to environmental protection, because when I was a little girl, I got to get out of the city, fleeing a polio epidemic actually, and go spend several weeks near a lake and trees. And I was blown away. I mean, I lived in a tiny little postage stamp downtown backyard, and I had never imagined that there was such beauty, and the birds and the animals. And of course, you know, a lot of the birds and the animals are gone now. But I realized right then that my heart belonged to those beautiful places in nature, and that I wanted to do whatever I could to look after them. And I've spent my whole life doing that.
Beautiful. Look at that, 2 minutes or less. Well done, ladies. And I'll just say, I walk Mojo, a 75-pounder in High Park every day, and it's what keeps me going each and every day. So it's good to see that we've all found a way to keep nature in our life. So that was the easy question, let's be honest. Let's go. There are concerns that in our commitment to human health, no, I did that one, our government seems to have let environmental and climate issues fall to the side. While businesses are embracing the opportunities, there seems to be a lack of leadership in Ontario to grab this opportunity. What will your government do to accelerate the green economy, our circular economy, and position Ontario as an innovator instead of a laggard on climate change? And I'm going to start with you, Andrea.
Thank you, Tanya. Okay, so you're correct that businesses have definitely stepped up and are moving forward on the climate change agenda. And I've definitely been part of those discussions, certainly recently at TD, where I was proud that we were the first Canadian bank to set a net zero commitment for 2050. And more recently, I've been with Deloitte as an advisor, helping their companies and clients that they deal with on their own sustainability goals. And it's a growing practice because companies now realize that they need to be part of the solution on climate and not just be part of the problem. But the challenge is that we lack a policy and regulatory environment to support that growing interest and to ensure that the commitments that companies make are actually tangible results and not just greenwashing. So one of my big motivations for getting involved as a political candidate was watching the Ford government erase the previous gains that we had made. Where we are today is really the cumulative result of the past 4 years of negligence, of poor decisions, and of wrong choices. Governments can be agents of change because they can bring people together, they can streamline efforts to fight climate change, because we know it's not only going to devastate our economy, but it's going to also make life so miserable for many people. And that's where myself, and I think aligned with the Ontario Liberal Party, sees that governments have a role to step in. They can offer incentives and disincentives to encourage polluters, both large and small, to move away from the use of fossil fuels, to adopt greener and cleaner alternatives, and to increase their waste conversion rate. Governments also can create an ecosystem, which I know is one of your favorite ones, that facilitates the adaptation of policies, practices, and decisions that can help individuals, families, and businesses to reduce their greenhouse gas emissions through the use of new technologies, such as electric vehicles or commuting using public transit, carpooling instead of gas-guzzling vehicles, or even things at the home like heat pumps as an example that are good for both heat and cooling. But most importantly, and to end, I think the sort of collective effort that we require and that we would anticipate from all parts of our society to reduce our carbon footprint can happen if government fosters an atmosphere of innovation and a strong commitment to environmental stewardship. And that's what we have to bring.
Beautiful. Thank you. And same question for you, Diane.
Thanks, Tanya. Well, as you know, I participated in CSI, was an early investor in CSI precisely because of the role that you play in growing the green economy. And as you know, I have a podcast, Green Economy Heroes. I put the link in the chat. I'll put it in again later, where I've been interviewing green business leaders across Canada for the last several years. And I've been delighted to find how many different ways there are for innovators to lead us. But you're absolutely right that we don't see leadership from the provincial government. Certainly we've had only destructive acts from the current government. I will say the previous governments, I also found hundreds of things to criticize in each of my 17 reports. So governments of past and present have a lot, could do an awful lot better. And that's the point of our roadmap to net zero, which is posted on my website, votefordiane.ca. We can have an important role in the new climate economy. Ontario has so many advantages that we could and should be building on. We have one of the most educated, most diverse populations in the world. We are one of the luckiest places in the world in our geography. We have the resources that we need for providing critical minerals and metals and clean energy and many other things. And we have been mostly sitting on our behinds and letting other countries like China steal a march on us and basically steal our lunch. So if we do want to be winners in the new climate economy, which we can be, then government has a critical role in setting the rules, creating the infrastructure, using its procurement power, and giving us all the incentives to make it happen, instead of the current situation where they stand in the way and make everything good hard and difficult. I know we have to do everything concisely, but all these things are important. We need to have a serious carbon budget. We need to have a serious carbon price. We need to be doubling our electricity supply to displace the $16 to $25 billion a year of fossil fuels that we import into Ontario. And we have to do it fast because the new climate economy is inevitable. What's not inevitable is who are the winners. And right now, we're not on track.
Beautiful. Right on time. Thank you, Diane. And now over to you, Jessica.
Thank you. We have developed a Green New Democratic Deal platform. It was developed in partnership with many MPPs, including myself, and the leader in that was MPP Peter Tabbins. He was the former Executive Director of Greenpeace Canada. And we've had this plan out. It was our first platform plank to put out before the 2022 election because we wanted to send a signal that this was a priority for us. I'm going to spend a bit of time just briefly outlining what it is. Number one, our climate plan includes real specific targets to get down to 50% emissions by 2030 and net zero by 2050. It includes a price on carbon that targets big emitters. So when you look at the federal government, they have a new price on carbon, but it exempts the first 80% of all emissions put out by big emitters. Our price on carbon would focus on big emitters, and it would include all the emissions that they release. And that would generate about $17 billion a year when you factor in the Green Bonds program that we also have. And that money would be used to fundamentally change our building sector, our transportation sector, and our electricity sector. They are the three sectors in Ontario that we really need to transform. When we're talking about transportation, we're talking about bringing in a zero-emission electric vehicle strategy. So we sell vehicles in Ontario that are electric, and we manufacture vehicles in Ontario that are electric. It also involves investing in sustainable transit, so we can get from A to B at an affordable price. Doesn't matter where we live, up north, in southwestern Ontario, in Barrie, or across Toronto. That is absolutely critical. And when it comes to thinking about transportation, we also need to make sure that walking and cycling are attractive and easy alternatives for everybody. And that means making our roads safe by passing legislation to make cycling and walking safe. And because people will cycle and walk when they know it's easy for them to do so. The two other pieces are the building sector. So transportation and building are the two biggest emitters of greenhouse gases. And when you're talking about building, we have a commitment to reduce emissions from the building sector by 50% by 2030, starting with getting public buildings, our schools, our hospitals, our community housing to net zero as quickly as possible, and then investing in a jobs creation program to target other sectors. It is absolutely essential that we do this. And then finally, we need to reform the electricity sector. The Ford government has been bad when it comes to having a good climate plan. And the worst thing they are doing right now is that they're rapidly investing in gas technology. They're building gas-powered plants, and that means we're locked in to an extremely unsustainable fuel. Mm-hmm. We have a commitment to phase out of gas-powered production as soon as possible and to invest in energy efficiency, affordable renewable, affordable solar and wind, and to really tackle that issue of energy storage. Because when we can tackle the issue of energy storage, it makes solar and wind much more viable. And the final piece is that we want to connect Ontario's grid to Manitoba's grid and Quebec's grid. Because when we do that, we can start flowing hydroelectric power from Quebec, which is cheap, into our electricity system so that we can meet our needs and build an affordable and green economy.
Nice. Thank you. I didn't know how to work my timer, so you got a little extra there. Stefan Maldich, you lead the next question and round.
Thank you so much. For those of you, I imagine all three of you sort of saw recently the new federal climate plan that came out that expects electricity emissions here in Canada to drop by 88%, which for emissions from the electricity sector. And however, the Ontario plan, or as it stands currently in Ontario, we expect new gas plants to come online, which will actually increase our emissions, especially in the electricity sector. And so how do you see Ontario fitting into that national climate plan where we can actually be supporting it rather than harming it? And I believe we start with
Diane.
Diane.
Thank you, Stefan. Actually, it's worse than that. It's not just that they're bringing fossil fuel plants on, having canceled 752 clean power projects and torn at least one down. It's also that they are engaged in an extraordinary set of sales into the U.S. where the clean part of our electricity is being sold by Ontario Power Generation to American buyers, so that the electricity, the cleanness of our electricity that the ISO claims isn't true anymore, and they're not disclosing the numbers. So it's actually quite a bit worse than that. As I indicated earlier, the three key pillars of our climate and environment plan, which are absolutely essential for a science-based plan and which nobody else has, is a serious carbon budget, legally binding, which would get us to real zero emissions by 2045. A serious carbon price, much higher than proposed by the others, but not imposed the way the NDP would on commodity producers, because that would drive them out of business, and doubling our electricity supply. So we would, we've done a very, very detailed model of our electricity system, and because solar and wind are so cheap now, and because we've got such great innovations in electricity storage, like HydroStore, which has got $250 million from Goldman Sachs, we can double our entire electricity supply without increasing the cost of electricity, and thereby displace almost all of the $15 to $25 billion a year of fossil fuels that we now import. The big limitation factor is transmission. So you'll see in our plan, as part of the $1 billion of support for Indigenous climate leadership that we have, that we've committed, is we know that we need to work with the Indigenous communities to be able to build the transmission that's necessary to support an electrified province. Transmission lines are really hard to build. The very first thing I did for the Ministry of Energy when I started working for them in 1975 was work on trying to get approvals for a transmission line. An electricity transmission line, it took 30 years. We're not going to be able to make the electricity transition unless we can both use distributed local energy but also be able to build transmission lines. And so that's one of the many, many reasons that environmental justice has to be part of reconciliation, and reconciliation has to be a critical part of our climate plan, which is why we give it so much priority.
Beautiful, down to the minute. Perfect.
And over to you, Jessica.
Thank you. So the question is, how do you see Ontario fitting into our national climate commitments? I just want to stop and talk about just briefly the federal government's climate commitments. They made some big announcements, but when you actually look at the details, including the details in the federal budget, a decision has been made to exempt the first 80% of all emissions from big emitters, so those emitters don't have to pay a carbon price. And when those emitters don't have to pay a carbon price, it means they're less incentivized to transition to the green economy that we need, and we've got less revenue to raise that we need to transition our economy. So our Green New Democratic Deal has a commitment to put a carbon price on targeting big emitters instead of you and I, in order to really incentivize them to do the right thing and use the best technology they have to reduce their greenhouse gas emissions, and also to create the revenue we need to transition our economy. As I mentioned, that will include investing in a sustainable transportation sector, so it's easy for us to walk and cycle and use public transit and use an electric vehicle in Ontario. It will require reforming our building sector. That includes things like changing our building code. That's an Ontario jurisdiction, so that we're building energy efficient and accessible buildings. And it will require retrofitting public institutions, our schools and our hospitals, and then moving to residential buildings, incentivizing homeowners to do that, making it easy for them to identify best practices if they want to retrofit, renovate their home. And then it will also require really transforming our electricity grid. Ontario did a good thing about a decade ago. They used regulation to phase out of coal power plants. And that's a reason why Toronto's air quality is a lot better than it used to be. Mm-hmm. So we need to use that innovation and commitment, that all-party commitment, because it was, to transform our electricity grid again and transition away from gas-powered plants, not investing but moving away from them, saying no to the Ford government's real enthusiasm for small nuclear reactors, which is an untested, untried technology, and doubling down on energy efficiency and affordable renewable, and connecting our grid to Manitoba and Quebec so we can access that cheap hydroelectric power. It is possible. We just need the political will to make it happen.
Perfect.
Amazing. And then to you, Andrea.
Sure, thanks. And I think what my fellow panelists have said is absolutely true, that the federal commitments can't be done without strong provincial results, right? I mean, it requires that to make it happen. Ontario, as we know, was once the leader when it comes to reducing GHG emissions through things, as Jessica mentioned, like, phasing out coal, which was a huge success we should definitely celebrate. But we've seen over the past 4 years under the Ford Conservative government, we have started to slide back. And if this continues, we are really going to lose our hard-earned gains. And essentially, we are heading backwards, basically. 40% of Canadians live in Ontario. So Ontario's failure will be Canada's failure. Mm-hmm. We have to do better. If we fail to maintain progress, Canada won't be able to reach the national target of being net zero by 2050. So we need to have a holistic, ambitious plan that does involve both individual and corporate kind of activities. We know that actually individuals and families want to do their part, even though I do agree with Jessica, it's a small part, but people want to. So we help them to retrofit their homes to make them more energy efficient. We can do incentives for businesses to also help them invest in cleaner technology that will reduce their own carbon footprint. And we want to invest in a green economy as well, so that it won't just help us achieve our environmental commitments, but also create thousands of well-paid, stable, full-time jobs, which we desperately need. And so our goal is to cut our emissions in half by 2030 and reach net zero by 2050, which will significantly contribute to that national goal if we can do that. Our investments in the green economy will for sure help Ontario, but will also help Canadian green businesses to scale up their production and research, attract and retain talent from all over the world, and potentially expand the market for their products globally and affect the global results as well. Most importantly, our plan is going to ensure that Ontario is once again a leader in demonstrating that when we do take the interests of environment seriously, it doesn't ruin the economy as much as Ford would have you think. In fact, it's the opposite. It helps us to drive further growth and to share our prosperity more widely.
Beautiful. I'm going to interject and just ask a question. If each of you could identify one thing that differentiates your party's answer to this question from the other ones, because you all sound great. Like, yes, please. And can I just acknowledge 1 second and say, the fact that coal-fired plants were eliminated in Ontario saved my kid's life, truly. He suffered from serious asthma so bad. And when that decision was made, nobody stood up and applauded that we actually did something good. And I think that we as citizens have to really, truly take a moment to say, that worked, right? The asthma rates, we don't even have smog days anymore. That was a thing. That was a very, very serious thing. And it so drives me nuts that we don't actually appreciate when things have gone well. So thank you for calling that out. Yes. Yeah, that was a solution that really, really worked. But back to my question. So if you had to say, what is the one thing that differentiates your party's answer to that question from the other parties? And we'll go in the same order that we did, just out of respect. So Diane, what is the one thing? And not a big, you don't get 2 minutes, you get like 15 seconds tops. Just one thing, quick, top of mind.
Well, one thing, for example, is the NDP plan to...
No, your position, what does your party do that's different?
Well, putting all of the carbon fees on industry would close our commodity industries like our steel plants and cost thousands of jobs. It wouldn't produce any environmental benefit. So our carbon price is broad-based right across the economy, which is what every economist says we need to do. And we would use the money, we'd give most of the money back to individuals so that poorer people end up better off.
Nice. What do you got, Jessica? I mean, I like it. Anyway, I'll let you answer. I have an answer for you.
Absolutely. So what's good about our plan? One, it's comprehensive, and it really focuses on the sectors that need to be transformed. There are clear, measurable targets every year, and we have a very strong commitment to really reform the building sector and the transportation sector. When you're looking at building, it's the second biggest emitter, and it's also a huge green jobs creator. So our focus is really on using regulation and investment to transform these sectors to get us to the green and affordable economy we need.
Okay, good. Andrea?
So we've yet to release our full plan because we expect that as government we need to have that fully costed and modeled. And you mentioned coal. In Ontario Liberal government,
I know.
phased out coal. We expect to lead again on climate, and so we're taking our time to do it right.
Okay, all right. So I hate to say it, ladies, but only one party will be elected. And all of you are from downtown Toronto. Many of us feel extremely disempowered by how little our voice seems to matter in Ontario elections. Right. For example, how can people in downtown Toronto, for example, change the tide on Highway 14? That's not the question, but it is an interesting challenge. If you are elected, but do not form a government, what will you do to advocate for climate issues or any issues from the riding of University-Rosedale? How will you bring our voices into Queen's Park? And I believe we're starting with you, Jessica.
Thank you. It's a very hard issue that Ontarians, progressive Ontarians, get up to 70%. We're up to 70% of the population, yet we have Doug Ford in power, majority rule, and he gets 35 to 40% of the vote. It's very frustrating, and it's why we are committed to electoral reform. Yes. So this is the last election. If we become NDP government, this is the last election where we split the vote and we have Doug Ford hold the power even though he doesn't get the majority of the votes. Our office and myself, I have always taken an organising approach to being an MPP, as well as my work as a community organiser and an executive director. And the reason why I say that is because we are only going to get things done if we work together. 100,000 residents in University-Rosedale, and then 14 million people across Ontario. And that looks like specific things. So when it comes to this riding, it means that it's my job to amplify your voice at Queen's Park, reading out your petitions, asking your questions to ministers, giving ministers letters directly about the issues that you're concerned about. And I've been doing this each and every day as an MPP. It also means amplifying advocacy organisations that are doing excellent work in this riding that need your support and involvement, which is why if there's an event in the area, we will encourage people to join. When we do town halls, pre-COVID, we used to bring experts like Ontario Parents Action Network or the Pembina Institute so that individuals in our riding can connect with advocacy organisations and build our power together. And the good thing is that despite the fact that we do not hold the majority in government, we have gotten success. We have stopped the subway upload. Remember when Doug Ford had that crazy plan to sever our subway from the rest of our transit system because he wanted to make money off it? We stopped that because we organised with municipalities, transit riders and transit workers. We stopped some of the worst bus service cuts that Doug Ford implemented by working with Halton councillors and Halton mums and organised and stopped that. We've stopped the worst of Doug Ford he so desperately wants to get into the green belt to build, but we've been very effective in building a province-wide coalition to stop him from doing that. And we've also been extremely effective at bringing forward road safety measures to make our streets safe for our seniors and our kids. And we've also done that by building a province-wide coalition of mums and municipalities and health advocates and road safety advocates to say no. We are going to work together in a nonpartisan coalition to get legislation passed. And we've got 2 pieces of legislation passed, and we're going to continue to do that and use that coalition effectively. These are just some of the many initiatives that we've got done over these past 4 years, because my understanding of power is that I'm just one vote at Queen's Park. But when I use my office and my skills and work with people across University-Rosedale and across Ontario, we get stuff done and again, and we're going to continue to do that.
Nice. Thanks, Jessica. And Andrea?
Sure. So I've actually not been a partisan person. In fact, I just recently joined the Liberal Party. And the reason I did that is because I actually believed in what they were doing and I felt they were best positioned to beat Doug Ford on June 2nd. And we all know that the best chance to advocate for climate issues is from inside government. But I am also a pragmatist, so I'm going to answer your question. So I have considered what's the role that I'd want to play if I was in opposition. And I think it's to do what I have done my entire life: build coalitions, work to find consensus and agreement where possible, and use power and influence for good. I'm a proud Torontonian, but I grew up, as I mentioned, in small town Ontario, and I understand their perspective. Much of my family still lives there. When I was the CEO of the Ontario Trillium Foundation, I had all the opportunities and challenges associated with trying to balance urban and rural issues in our overall strategy, and figuring out what are the things that need to be centralized versus local. I have friends and colleagues who identify with all of the different parties, and I can find ground with all of them on which to build. Climate and some other issues have often been the victim of politics rather than the beneficiary. We use the issues as wedges rather than finding shared interests. Now, in my volunteer life, I spent 20 years as sexual reproductive rights champion with International Planned Parenthood Federation. I'm also the eldest of 5 children, and so I know how to have a fight. But we have made more gains in the global abortion rights arena by bringing people on side first, seeing the human aspects, than we have by trying to fight them in court, although that has also been critical. So what I think I bring is the experience of knowing when to build coalitions and use influence, and how to fight hard on those hills that you do wish to die on.
Nice. Thank you. That's good. Diane.
Yes, thank you. Well, one of the answers is to vote green. We know the Green MPPs punch way above our weight. We've seen that from Elizabeth May and Mike Schreiner. And it's the biggest way for people in this riding to have an impact. I mean, sending me back to Queen's Park as deputy leader of the Green Party would have more impact than anything else people can do on June 2nd. I'll have a powerful voice there because of who I am and what I've done and what I know. And that's why so many thought leaders have endorsed me, including senior people crossing party lines from the Conservatives, the Liberals, and the NDP, is precisely because having a powerful individual voice at Queen's Park makes a difference. It makes a huge difference. And we know that electing Greens sends shockwaves through the old parties, and they borrow our ideas, which is, happens frequently, and that's great because one of the things that we do as the Green Party is very much what I did as environmental commissioner. I didn't get to order anybody around. But what I did do was put the facts on the table and set out what good policy should look like. And that changes the conversation, and that is what the Green Party does. A second thing I would say in terms of people feeling disempowered, how do we affect the broader conversation? We can't do that if we stay in downtown Toronto. Now, I've grown up in downtown Toronto. My whole family has lived here for 4 generations in the center of Toronto. And so it was particularly important for me when I was the Environmental Commissioner of Ontario to spend many, many days a year giving hundreds of talks all around Ontario, talking and listening to local people. If we want to affect what people think, what they value, what they do outside of Toronto, we can't do it by just preaching at them from downtown Toronto. We have to go there, we have to listen. And as deputy leader, that's one of the things that I would be doing again.
Beautiful. Thank you, all of you. And I'll turn the next question over to Stefan.
Amazing. Thank you so much, everyone. So I'm going to slightly augment this question to bring in a piece of one of the questions from one of our online attendees. But we've talked a fair amount already about transportation, but I want to zero into it for half a second because most North American governments have focused on electric vehicles as a solution to transit emissions. In the short and medium terms, electric vehicles are inaccessible to many of Canadian society due to their costs and lack of charging stations. And in the long term, EVs do not address sprawl or road safety and the needs of many Canadians. Obviously, they are important, but they cannot be the be all end all of climate policy when it comes to emissions. And so I'm curious, how will your government support both urban mass transit and intercity transit, as well as secondary infrastructure? And then if I can add an addendum to this, what will your party do well, the question that was posed in the chat was, will your party agree to cancel Highway 413 and the Bradford bypass, which were the two sort of controversial pieces of highway that are put forward? And then finally, if you have time, which I'll be impressed if you do, if you want to talk about EVs, by all means, please let us lay out your EV plan, but I would love to hear the first two. And I believe we will start with...
I think Andrea, is that right?
Andrea.
That's going to be so easy in 2 minutes. Thank you, Stefan. Okay, so we do know transportation is one of the largest sources of greenhouse gas emissions. So to tackle that...
Just 1 second, if I can pause up. Y'all are on mute.
We're on mute?
It had to happen, guys. It had to happen.
That's a new one.
You're on mute. Are we good? Yeah, okay, great.
We're
Thank
good?
you. Yeah, we're good.
Okay.
Start again, start again.
2
Yeah,
minutes.
no, you get, you get an extra 2 seconds or so for that.
So yeah, we all know that transportation is one of the largest source of greenhouse gas emissions. So to tackle that, we're going to prioritize building new transit infrastructure. Our plan's going to involve a record investment in public transit. As you mentioned, in urban environments, it's absolutely required, but also rebates for purchasing or leasing electric vehicles, as well as for installing charging stations. And I think we've already released that part of the platform. So as we set an ambitious goal for transition away from gas-powered vehicles to electric ones, we know we also open up enormous economic opportunities. Our plan will not only strengthen the production and assembly of electric vehicles right here in Ontario, but also their accessories such as batteries. We aim to establish Ontario as a global leader in manufacturing batteries, as well as other energy storage devices, and a source of minerals that make up those batteries, both in an environmentally responsible way. Our plan, though, also looks at what you, I think, refer to in the question, land use planning. Mm-hmm. How do we build complete communities that actually reduce the need for car trips, encourage active modes of transportation such as biking or walking, promoting also a healthy and active lifestyle? I'll be clear on your last point then. An Ontario Liberal government would stop Highway 413, which we know is Doug Ford's reward to his billionaire buddies and friends, but also will devastatingly pave over thousands of acres of environmentally sensitive areas and destroy prime farmland. Instead, we're going to invest $10 billion in schools, which we know we desperately need to do. The other highway project, which you mentioned, of course, which is at the top of everyone's mind, is the Bradford bypass. So we will pause the work on the proposed bypass until a new environmental assessment is done, since the current assessment hasn't been updated since 1997. And if that assessment fails to meet environmental and community standards, we will also stop that.
Very clear. Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Question.
Same question over to Jessica.
Is it Jessica or Diane? I think Diane's next.
All right, Diane, sure, go Diane.
Sorry, I've got my little system here, but.
Sure. Well, absolutely. We would cancel. We are pledged to cancel the 413 and Bradford bypass. It doesn't need environmental assessment. We know already it's a devastatingly bad idea. We would cancel them immediately. In terms of the larger question, we need fast, cheap, transformative changes in transportation. And really, the only way to do that is to reallocate public space. So you'll see in our climate plan, Roadmap to Net Zero, and I've put the link to it in the chat a couple of times, that's where we start. I mean, in the longer term, of course, we need to change urban forms so that people live closer to where they need to go. But in the short term, what we can do really quickly is to reallocate a huge amount of road space, parking space, which is wasted on cars, to active transportation and to clean electric buses. So we know that in the GTA, we can triple transit use by 2030. But for that, we need dedicated bus lanes so that the buses are on time, reliable, and they need to be electric so that they will be clean, low vibration, comfortable to be in. And that gives a high quality transportation, especially to people who are less well off. It does it fast. It helps clean up the air, and it would be also really, really good for human health. So we know how it's done. We can see it being done around the world. Look at places like Seville, for example, and of course Barcelona and Paris and Copenhagen and a number of places in Northern Europe, and many other places have found that there is a huge untapped public demand for cycling if there's a safe way to do it. As soon as we create safe, protected bike lanes, lots of people show up to bike. Toronto, we have a patchwork. It's very difficult to get from A to B without going through dangerous places, which put your life at risk, and that's simply bad infrastructure planning. So by providing safe cycling options, we will find, as in many other places, a huge amount of cycling available. And one of the things, we have an EV strategy, of course, both an EV supply chain strategy and an EV incentive strategy, but one of the things is a $1,000 incentive for an e-bike. And that's because lots of people who can't bike a lot on regular bikes can find their life transformed with electric bike. And given my sore knees, I'm one of those people. And having an electric bike is amazing. It gives you the freedom of the city, and it creates almost no pollution, and it costs almost nothing. It costs to go 8,600 kilometers on an electric bike, costs $6 in electricity.
Nice. It's going to be wild on those streets. It's going to be great. Jessica.
Thank you. Before I was the MPP for University-Rosedale, I had the privilege of being the founding executive director of TTC Riders. The purpose of TTC Riders was to build, and still is its purpose, to build a rider-led movement of transit riders that are committed to creating an affordable transit system that was fast and efficient. And once I became the MPP for University-Rosedale, I became the transit critic. There are a few things that an NDP government will implement in order to make public transit a fast and affordable option for people. That includes investing in municipal operations and maintenance. So right when the Liberal government was in power, as well as the previous Conservative government, they did choose to cut funding, provincial funding to municipal transit agencies. And the problem with that is it meant that municipalities didn't have the money to bring in fast service, like dedicated bus lanes, like discount fares for lower income workers or seniors or children, or even the ability to maintain our current system. I'm sure a few of you remembered the hot summer a few years ago where the air conditioning on the subway stopped working. That was a direct result of a lack of funding, a lack of provincial funding for municipal transit systems. An NDP government would restore that to allow for more affordable fares, lower fares, as well as faster service. But there are a few other pieces to this. One, a few years ago, the Ford government basically deregulated intercity transit. So if you wanted to get from London to Toronto up to Ottawa or Barrie, or further north, Sudbury, Sault Ste. Marie, it's extremely difficult to use public transit to do that. An NDP government would reinvest in an intercity provincial transit system so that we can get from A to B from one major city to another. And this is not just to help people get around. It also makes it easy for people who need healthcare treatment downtown, who do not have chemotherapy that they can access in Sault Ste. Marie, to easily get down to Toronto to get their treatments. It's also a commitment that the Indigenous murdered and missing women have been advocating for many years, because women do get targeted when they are hitchhiking or not able to easily get from A to B in rural areas. It is a huge problem. There are many other measures that we will advocate for. The other one that I think is really key is around road safety. As I mentioned before, we've done a lot of work on road safety. It is tragic every time you hear of a child dying or being injured because a car has illegally taken a right-hand turn, or a senior who has died because they're trying to get to a TTC stop and there's no stop sign in the middle of the intersection, so they try and cross the road to get there easily. This happens every day in Toronto. It's an absolute tragedy. We have a commitment to bring in a Vision Zero provincial strategy, which means every decision the transportation makes provincially is done in order to keep people safe and reduce deaths and injuries on our roads to zero. Because when we do that, it makes cycling and walking an affordable and safe alternative, which means more people will do it. We do have an electric vehicle strategy. I'm sure there'll be another question about it, but there are two pieces that we're working on.
Thank you very much. And so I just was reflecting on how delicious and what a ridiculous relief it is to be having such an intelligent conversation with all three of you. I just want to say thank you for being willing to engage in meaningful, deep policy conversations. But the message is really for you guys. If there's going to be questions, I'm watching as the chat, they all are getting like direct question answer stuff going on, and I haven't had much, and we're going to have a chance as we come to a close to hear some questions from you. I'd really love it if you could write those questions down and slip them to me, but in a big enough font size that this old woman can, oh, are we getting them to you, Elvira? Elvira will do that. She will make sure they're really a big font and clearly printed for this woman who's losing her sight. So if you have those, and Stefan, just to say you'll be given a chance to, and then, you know, as our final question, we're not there yet, but I'd love to hear your thoughts on each other's answers to these things too, and open up a little bit more dialogue. So, but I'm going to take you to the next question, which is actually my favorite question. It's a question around complex systems. And, you know, you mentioned the word ecosystems as one of my favorite words. It is. And that's because one of the realities that we know, and nature and biomimicry teaches us this each and every day, is you may study a silo, but that's not how it all works, people. It's all connected. We know that it's all connected, and these issues are all connected, and we can no longer afford to bring a single lens to complex issues. So tell me how you and your government will handle the intersectionality of affordable housing, protecting green and blue spaces, green jobs, energy efficiency, human health impacts, caring, transportation, and the opportunities to create a regenerative economy for all. And specifically what I'm looking for, and some of you mentioned it a little bit earlier, but how have you personally in the past worked through complex systems to engage people across silos, departments, and ministries? How have you done it, ladies? Because this is hard stuff, and if we keep looking through a single lens, it's never going to work. And I think that we are starting with Diane.
Okay, well, thank you for the simple question. The short answer, Tanya, is of course you're right. And that's why when you look at our roadmap for net zero, it's not just about climate. Our platform has 3 pillars, and they are interrelated, and each is essential. Our mental health pillar, and we were the first party to ever have a standalone mental health policy. Our housing policy and our climate policy, and they all work together. And within the climate policy, again, we have the roadmap to net zero. We made the decision that we couldn't just deal with climate. We also had to deal with biodiversity collapse and equity, because we can't solve any one of these alone. And so each of the pieces works with all of the others. We know that the largest source of climate pollution in Ontario isn't industry. Industry is a comparatively small polluter. The largest source of climate pollution in Ontario, as I document in my reports, is people driving around. And we drive around so much because of urban sprawl. Mm-hmm. So we have to deal with sprawl. We have to stop sprawl, and we're the only party that would stop sprawl. And then we have to reclaim the suburbs so that people don't have to go through the worst commutes in North America 2 times a day, every day. No one of these pieces can work without the other. Similarly, we know that who needs climate action the most? It's the most vulnerable, because climate chaos will exacerbate vulnerability and inequality, and thoughtless action on climate will also victimize the most vulnerable. So we have to hold all of these perspectives together when we choose solutions. And that's why you'll see in our roadmap to net zero, 27% of the money goes to make sure that we're not leaving anybody behind. Because we won't be able to withstand the harm or blows of climate change or make the changes we need to make unless we can bring everybody along. So every part of our 3 pillars is done with that lens in mind. That's why we consulted extensively with racialized communities, with poverty advocates, as well as the usual range of experts on all the different parts of climate and environment. They have to work together. The great good news is we still have a small window to make all those things better. We really do have the opportunity. Climate chaos is giving us a kick in the rear. It's going to give us a kick in the teeth and in the belly. It's going to keep getting worse. If we use this moment, we can make so many other things better.
Beautiful.
But we can't do it with tweaks. And we can't do it just with little gentle incentives.
I
It's going to
I
take
think Elon Musk
transformational
disagrees
change.
with you, but
Awesome. And we can make so much happen.
yeah.
Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you, Diane. Sorry. Jessica, we're going to turn it over to you. And I invite you to, give us an example, too, of how you've dealt with that complexity, because it ain't easy, sister.
No, it's not easy. I was thinking of 2 examples. My background, as I mentioned, was in community organising and being an executive director for environmental nonprofits. And I thought of 2 examples where we've won real tangible change for people by patiently working with different stakeholders for many years to get stuff done. The example I like to think of is my work with the California Food and Justice Coalition. We built a big, broad tent coalition of 300 organizations, public health agencies, local farmers, racialized farmers, food banks, public health departments. And we met all across California to develop a campaign to reform the Farm Bill, which is this big US bill. It always gets passed because the Republicans love it too, to get more funding for organic farming in California, and also to get more funding for people who are experiencing hunger. And we were successful in that initiative because we had the patience to build a broad tent coalition. The second example I like to give is with the low-income pass that we established in the City of Toronto. Through many years of organising, we worked with seniors groups, public health departments, municipalities, the TTC, to come up with a low-income pass that people could access. And then we worked like hell. It took months and months and months to build up the political pressure we needed to get it done. And TTC Riders continues to work to this day to ensure that pass gets fully implemented and funded. So it's really some examples of patience and results. When I think about the need to have a comprehensive approach that deals with this issue of intersectionality, I go back to our Green New Democratic Deal, because it was written in partnership with environmental stakeholders and industry. It took many months to write. We had consultations even here in University-Rosedale, and we've come up with a visionary and bold plan that will transform our economy. It will help bring in affordable housing by saying no to urban sprawl and the Ford government's insistence that he wants to allow urban sprawl to be built, and yes to building more missing middle in neighbourhoods we want to live in so that we can meet demand. It says yes to building a sustainable transportation sector by encouraging active transportation and transit. And it also says yes to reforming our housing sector by reforming our building code. These are all win-win-win initiatives that'll get us to where we want to go.
Great. Thank you. Your turn.
Sure. So post-grad school, which I did at U of T, I spent the next decade of my career in the community health center sector, working actually in the northwest of the city in what at the time was called one of Toronto's priority neighborhoods, several of them. And the model of community health centers is actually built on the determinants of health approach. So recognizing that someone's health status was actually really impacted by their housing status, the environment around them, poverty, racism, and that all of those things contributed to health. And so it was a broad-based approach, and that a comprehensive approach was required in order to address what were complex and interconnected issues, as you mentioned, Tanya. And I've actually taken that mindset with me to every role in every organization I've worked in since. We have seen, particularly through COVID, the interconnectedness of all those things: social, health, economic, and environmental issues that all sort of came together in this tsunami all at once, unfortunately disproportionately impacting certain segments of the population more than others. And that was true before COVID, but it was definitely amplified. So one of the things that I feel I can bring to my role as an MPP is that I do have experience getting things done in large bureaucratic organizations across departments and ministries. Certainly as the CEO of the Ontario Trillium Foundation, we had to work with all of government. TD Bank Group, 90,000 employees, mostly in Canada and the US, but across the globe. And we got a net zero commitment made when TD is one of the largest investors in fossil fuels. And I tell you, that wasn't easy. And that wasn't done through being adversarial and in fighting. It was actually the mindset and approach that we take. So it's about a belief in the role of evidence in decision making, an orientation to data, being clear about the vision for the future you want to seek, the outcomes that you're looking for, and agreeing to be accountable for the results. And most importantly, and I think this is really important for government right now, is being transparent, not only on the successes that you have, but on where you need to improve. And we know that trust in government is waning, and it's really, really important for all of us to really beef that up. Using influence, building coalitions, a shared vision, and most critically, I think what I can bring is I have always brought a values-based approach to that work. And so that's how I would tackle government, that big behemoth.
That big behemoth, that's perfect, thank you. Yeah, I agree. This next question is so good for people representing the urban center. So over to you, Stefan. Because I think you all have a lot of knowledge on this one, guys. Watch out for it.
Yeah, we're moving into farming. A 2021 report from the National Farmers Union marked out a pathway towards net zero carbon emissions for the industry by 2030. And yet the federal plan only hopes to reduce emissions by 8%. And farmers want to be a part of the solution, and they've seen the ways in which the industry has shifted into fewer and larger and more consolidated farms. And so, if elected, how would your government aim to buck this trend and also address the crisis of rising prices for feed and fertilizer in farm country, and then while also supporting regenerative agriculture and helping them reduce emissions from the sector? And we'll start with Jessica.
Oh, thank you. I once again think of my work with the California Food and Justice Coalition. I kind of fell into that job, but I grew to love it. And aside from the success with getting more funding from the Farm Bill, we also started up one of California's first food policy councils on Oakland. And the reason why it was so wonderful is because we used Toronto's Food Policy Council as an inspiration. And we also passed some of California's first low-carbon food policies through Berkeley City Council. But it's kind of cheating because it was Berkeley, so everyone said yes straight away. We're really lucky here in Ontario because water is in abundance and we have a thriving farming sector that brings in $47 billion a year. We are extremely lucky to have that. And the reason why I say that is because I grew up in Australia where water is not in abundance. Water is now a privatized commodity where you have to spend a huge amount of money to get the water that you need to grow food, and a lot of it is imported. So we are in an extremely unique situation here in Ontario, and we're extremely lucky. There are a few measures that an NDP government will move forward on. One is that we will protect the farmland we have, because we have some of the world's best farmland. We don't have the best weather, but we have some of the best farmland. By stopping the Ford government's insistence to force municipalities to open up farmland and allow developers to basically embark on massive urban sprawl in Hamilton, Halton, Peel Region and beyond. That needs to stop. We need to build in existing communities. We also need to keep local farms alive, and one of the best ways we can do that is to keep local farmers in their small towns, and that means working to keep small towns alive. That means investing in schools and hospitals and broadband internet and infrastructure to make it possible to raise a family and keep a family and continue to live on your farm and have that as a viable living. Because farmers are leaving Ontario farms in droves, and the system is becoming very quickly consolidated by big ag. It is also critical that we take a justice lens when we're thinking about our farming sector. We fly in thousands and thousands of workers from South America and Mexico to work in very difficult conditions to grow our food. Farmers are not, these farm workers, these migrant workers have no path to permanent residency or citizenship. They get paid very little. They are not allowed to unionize. And they're mostly exempt from all the workplace protections that other workers in Ontario have. That needs to change. That absolutely needs to change. Migrant workers are critical to our farming sector, and they deserve to work here and stay here and have good jobs. It's absolutely fundamental. We need to make sure it's absolutely fundamental.
And our 2 minutes are up.
Oh, no. Okay.
We've got one last point. Go ahead. Keep it short.
Goodness. Okay.
'Cause I'm kind.
We are committed to moving forward with a provincial food and water strategy, and that includes making sure that we create opportunities for local farmers and local farming sectors to sell food within Ontario. And that's just not with farmers markets, which is good, but it also means really setting up those institutional channels. So how can we make sure our schools are buying local, organic,
Nice.
Ontario food, and our hospitals and our institutions so that we can really scale up? That's absolutely necessary to green our ag sector in Ontario.
Thanks, Jessica.
Thanks for giving me an extra.
Yeah, it's no problem. I just have to defend the nature of the question
good.
here because, agriculture, we depend on it to feed ourselves and our family. And one of the things that's so critically important is that we continue to build a more robust relationship between cities and farms and rural. So I think it's important that we learn from all those different perspectives and think about what's got. Also, my dad's an organic farmer, and so I know what he's up against. Andrea?
Sure, and I think also it's important that if you're an MPP, and particularly if you're in government, you represent your riding, but you also have to do what's right for all of Ontario, right? It's an important question. So we know that climate change does require an all-hands-on-deck approach, which I think everyone has spoken to already. And in a diverse geography and an economy like Ontario, agriculture has to then be at the fore. It's a big part of us. In the last 2 roles that I've had in my professional life, I've had the opportunity to create partnerships with local environmental NGOs who are on the ground finding solutions. And one of them, called ALICE, is actually Alternative Land Use Services, comes to mind that we knew quite well. Organization works with farmers and ranchers to implement nature-based solutions to combat climate change and biodiversity loss. And that organization has grown exponentially, which really is an indication to me of the keen interest in farmers and ranchers in contributing to climate solutions. To make meaningful progress on reducing our carbon footprint, we have to take into account the unique challenges for people living in various parts of the Ontario geography. And so that's why we will develop a made in rural climate action plan that acknowledges the unique potential and challenges that exist in our rural communities, particularly those that are dependent on farming. To support emission reduction in the agriculture sector, we're going to help our farmers financially buy energy efficient tools and equipment, because these new modern tools and equipment not only reduce a farm's carbon footprint, but also increase productivity. We also want to be laser focused on preserving our farmlands, which I think everyone will agree with. We are losing hundreds of thousands of acres of farmland every week. And that's why we're going to scrap the MZOs that Ford Conservatives have used to pave over farmlands and to help their rich donors and lobbyists and developers. If farmers have ample farmland, they can yield enough crops through organic processes without the need for aggressively using pesticides and chemicals that don't just harm species, but actually potentially harm humans as well. And we should be concerned about that. And then lastly, I would just sort of say, I think we also really need to support research and innovation in the sector. You know, I did my undergraduate at University of Guelph, which has like this wonderful agricultural college. And most people don't know about it. It is so critical to our climate action plans. So we need to invest in research on sustainable farming, enhance collaboration amongst researchers and farmers so that farmers can benefit from the innovative work that's taking place, and also support the commercialization of the outcome of that research activities, because I think that's going to help not only reach all corners of the province, but potentially pay for more research, which we do need.
Nice, beautiful, thank you. And Diane, final word on the final figured out question, then we're going to turn it over to the masses.
Well, thank you. Well, absolutely. Agriculture is absolutely essential. Don McCabe was the head of the the Ontario Farmers Association, always used to tell me that farming was 10% of the problem and could be 20% of the solution. And he's absolutely right. There are a number of things that are absolutely key. The first is to stop sprawl. And we've all talked about sprawl, but you'll see in the NDP plan, they don't even mention sprawl. And of course, we don't know what's in the Liberal plan yet. Whereas stopping sprawl and canceling those highways is absolutely critical and essential and has to be done immediately, or we're not going to have the land we need to grow food on as food crops come under increasing pressure all around the world. The second thing that we have to do is to make sure that there's more pricing power for farmers. I mean, Jessica, you mentioned farmers not paying enough to migrant workers. Well, that's because farmers are being completely squeezed. They get a tiny percentage of the food dollar. And part of that's because of corporate concentration. So a code of conduct to make sure that pricing is fairer to farmers is also a part of that. But fundamentally, we have to support climate smart farming, and we do know how to do it. The first piece is a soil health approach, and I encourage everyone to look at my soil health report, one of the 17 reports I delivered to the legislature when I was commissioner, showing many of the problems we have, including the fact that the provincial government has completely abandoned the job of educating farmers. Used to call them extension agents. They've been wiped out. And now the job of educating farmers and helping them solve their problems is left to chemical company salesmen. So, of course, they just persuade them to buy more chemicals. The second thing we have to do is we have to use government procurement to buy local good quality food so that there is a guaranteed market for farmers so that they can make a living and can afford to plant their crops. And the third thing we need is crop loss guarantees. So one thing that we're seeing even in the United States is crop insurance premiums, discounts for farmers who have cover crops and so on to improve the health of their soil. We don't have that in Ontario. It makes no sense at all. We need to have crop loss guarantees for farmers as they switch away from chemical agriculture, because there's a short-term loss of income. Usually 2-3 years, can be up to 10 years. After that, farms with really good quality soil health, minimal use of chemicals, much more resilient to floods and droughts, much better able to cope with what climate change is bringing us. But we can't expect farmers to do all of that on their own. Similarly, farmers get no compensation for maintaining wetlands, woodlands that protect everyone downstream. They're just expected to do that at their own expense. So if we want farmers to make these changes, and we do because we need them to, we need to stand up and support them with appropriate incentives, good government procurement, and proper education.
Great.
As well as decent premiums. So thank you for all the farmers. I really appreciate the food.
Yeah, I do too. Thank you, Diane. Thank you very much. So I don't know about you, Stefan, but I got about 5 questions here. I know we're not going to get through them all. I'm ready to take the first one, and you might take the second one. But after we each do one, I actually invite each of you to ask a question of the other 2 candidates. Just throwing it out there, because I think you might have questions that are more interesting than us. So just as a thought. But I'll start us off with this one. And bearing with us all that these are just coming from the audience. You're going to have to wing it, everyone. But this one was really interesting to me. How will your party address the concerns of the First Nations people in the pursuit of economic opportunities of rare minerals for the potential for environmental degradation, i.e. cancer? And I guess, you may not all want to or have to answer this. We could even, if you feel comfortable taking a stab at it. But this is a really complex issue, this one, right? It's looking at the issues of First Nations, the economic opportunities that are being presented, the mining of rare minerals, and the potential environmental and toxic exposures. So while you're thinking about that, I'll just say I did spend 8 years working on toxics in kids' health. And I think it must be said that when you come up with a solution, it doesn't matter what level of government, what party's in power. When you have a concrete solution, it can be implemented. And some of the biggest issues around toxics and children's health have been increasingly, we're watching as governments are able to work collaboratively to address some of those. So I see Diane raised her hand. She wants to take it on first. Go for it, Diane.
Well, absolutely. Thank you, Tanya. Well, one of the advantages of having worked on this field for 46 years is I've worked on all of these issues. And in my 2017 report to the Ontario Legislature, Good Choices, Bad Choices, one of the things I looked at was the disproportionate pollution of First Nations, including the horrendous situations we've created at Grassy Narrows and on Genong and on the reserves that don't have drinking water. So that's part of why support for Indigenous climate leadership is so important. And you'll see in our plan, in addition to the $1 billion I mentioned before, we have pledged to respect Indigenous protected and conserved areas and to give them priority over logging and mining. We do need wood, we do need minerals, but there's no reason why it should be such an exploitive system that we have now, where even today miners can go in and explore on First Nations territory without notice, without consent, and regardless of the destruction that they cause. We need Indigenous communities to lead. They're willing to lead. They want to see a transformation to the green economy because, again, the most vulnerable suffer the most. The First Nations communities suffer the most. It's no accident that the town that burnt down last year Lytton was an Indigenous community. So Indigenous communities know what's at stake, but they need to be able to say yes here, not there in their territories, and they have to be able to set the rules so that they're not just left behind with filth as we have all across Canada, the residue of destructive mining practices, and we just simply cannot have that anymore.
Nice, thank you.
Oh, one other thing about that, we need to have a zero waste economy, a circular economy, so that when we do take metal from the ground, we don't just use it once and throw it away. We use it and 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 take really good care of it because it's valuable. And that's why there's a whole zero waste section in our plan.
Perfect. And I'll just say, you said the word that I love most. My team will be able to tell you the word circles. Circularism, circular economy, no waste, zero, but also inclusion, right? What if we were to actually use the circle, something we learned before we went to public school, I just want to say, as the design principle for all of the challenges that we face? What if we were to replace capitalism with circularism? Just putting it out there.
I was going to say, can I answer the Indigenous question?
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. Okay, that's going out there. I get it. Go ahead, Andrea.
Well, I think my answer to that would be to further the path of reconciliation is to recognize the right for First Nations communities to self-determination and that they actually know best what is right for their communities. And they're not a homogenous group. I've had the opportunity to be invited up to many First Nations in Ontario, including Kitchener-Makusa-Beninawag, which is about as far north as you can fly in Ontario. And what I have found is people who are acutely aware of both the economic and environmental needs of their communities and the fine balance that must be made in weighing different opportunities that they have. And so one of the things that I think comes up often in these conversations is that we assume what is best for those communities and that all of those communities think the same thing. And that is absolutely not true. And so we do need to be committed to the right to self-determination, to listening and to learning, and to having a process that is fair and transparent and respects the Truth and Reconciliation Commission.
Couldn't agree more. Beautiful. Jessica, do you want to weigh in on this one? Sure. Oh, sorry, there's clapping.
I had the privilege of working with Indigenous communities to uphold their right to say no to industrial logging and mining, and to say yes to sustainable development. As an organiser with Rainforest Action Network, we worked on a successful campaign to support the Haida First Nations fight to stop industrial logging and to build a sustainable logging economy. And for many years, I worked with the Grassy Narrows First Nation to say no to industrial logging and yes to having control over their land, and to force the provincial government to allocate $80 million to clean up the English Wabigoon River system so that they can continue to fish and live and be free from mercury poisoning. And that work continues to this very day. And it's an example of the success that can be achieved by having civil society partner with Indigenous communities that want to fight for a sustainable future. There are many examples out there where there is a success that can be replicated. When we are talking about Indigenous reconciliation and Indigenous rights in Ontario, we are talking about forestry and mining, because we continue to be a resource economy. That is what Ontario is known as. My work as an MPP is led by the three Indigenous and Métis MPPs in the 40 MPP caucus. Suze Morrison, Toronto Centre, who has chosen to step down. Guy Bourgoin, who is Métis from Muskoka, James Bay, and Sol Mamakwa, who is an Indigenous MPP who had the difficulty of growing up in a residential school. We are committed as a party, and we have been advocating for this for many years now, and we've actually got the Ford government to agree in principle. They just need to move it through committee to abide by the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People.
Nice.
Which includes the right to free, prior and informed consent, which means if resource activity is going to take place on an Indigenous community's territory, it needs to be done through nation-to-nation negotiation to work out a sustainable deal that works for everyone. That is something that our party is committed to, and it is something that I am personally committed to as well.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Jessica. I just saw Jane Garthen said, "Aren't all of these three wonderful women amazing?" Yeah, exactly. Stefan, what does the virtual world, what is the one pressing question of the virtual world?
Well, there are many great questions, but I think the one that we haven't really touched on at all in this topic so far is actually talking about climate adaptation. And so this question is asking if each of you could comment on how the provincial government or your provincial government could strengthen climate adaptation efforts across public sector organizations such as municipalities, education, and health that receive significant provincial infrastructure funding. And I guess we can do this maybe in reverse. So starting with you, Jessica.
Okay. The Q&A is always harder.
I know, sorry.
That's okay.
I think if I get it right, what would your government do to address climate adaptation? Is that fair?
Yes, specifically within places where that receive a significant amount of provincial funding.
Okay, so where there's a lot of existing provincial funding. And I think really the point here is, had we been better prepared for the pandemic, maybe it's like, had we been better prepared for the impact of climate change, what would we wish we had done in 10 years from now? So, I do think that this is, look, we know we have to be thinking about the worst eventualities. What will we do in Ontario and for those people most vulnerable?
Thank you. This is a question. I first got involved in climate organising in the climate justice movement over 20 years ago. And at the time, there was a real divide between people who didn't want to think about mitigation and adaptation and just wanted to think about solutions and getting our greenhouse gas emissions down. There's a huge divide within the community. And increasingly, as time has gone on, there is this very harsh realization that climate change is already here and that we have no choice. We have no choice to adapt. And tragically, it requires us to adapt in an environment where we are experiencing the real impact of climate change each and every day now, where we have massive wildfires along the west coast. We have heat bubbles that hit BC. We have Houston experiencing biblical level 100-year floods every year. We have Puerto Rico that has been devastated. And tragically, that will continue to hit here in Ontario as well. So it will require a whole-scale response. I want to give you a few examples of how we are thinking about this. One, we need to strengthen our infrastructure. So on a Toronto level, that means changing our building code so that people who live in apartments can live in energy efficiency apartments that are cooler in summer so that they can survive. That means having a maximum temperature and requiring developers to build buildings so that there is a maximum temperature limit. Because what we saw in BC is that the people that died in the extreme heat wave in summer were elderly people who lived alone in unair-conditioned apartments. Mm-hmm. That was the primary source of people dying in that extreme heat wave, and they're going to continue to come. We also need to invest in our infrastructure by making sure that when there are extreme floods, we have the capacity to move that water quickly through cities, and also to invest in our tree canopy, our parks, and green our cities as much as we can so that the water can be absorbed. Two more examples that I'd like to give. My colleague, MPP Peter Tabbins, as well as my colleague, Patila Kapoche, have introduced numerous bills to require our health sector and our public sector to think through what will be required to adapt to a new hotter climate, especially when we're thinking about health. We are going to be exposed to more heat-related events. We are more likely to experience mosquito-borne diseases, more Lyme. So we need to factor that in and transform our health sector accordingly. And then finally, we also need to look at our farming sector as well. That sustains us, and it needs to be able to adapt so that we can continue to grow food and provide food and transport it and provide it while our climate is changing as well. It's a huge issue.
It's pretty scary. Thanks, Jessica.
It is scary. It is scary.
Yeah.
Yes, it is.
Yeah.
But we can either be apathetic or we can take action and be hopeful. And
That's right.
Taking action and being hopeful is the only path forward.
Absolutely. Do you want to
Yeah.
go? Yeah. Okay, we
Yeah, happy
got
to.
some claps. Got some claps. Yeah. Good.
Thank you, Jessa, for going first.
Oh, my
It's very, very nice.
I get a lot of conservatives asking me very outrageous questions in the legislature, and
Yeah,
You
this
get
is-
used
this
to
is
it.
eas-
This is
This is
kinder.
easier.
This
This is
kinder.
kinder, gentler.
So I might just also modify the question a little bit, because the question really focused on how will you work with other public sector organizations, but I want to acknowledge the role that there are private sector players have to play. So insurance companies are one of them. Insurance companies are actually at the forefront of a lot of research on this topic for bottom line reasons, but it's actually quite helpful. And when I was involved in helping with our policy development, we actually met with a number of insurers that said, there's very simple things that homeowners can do that are inexpensive that will prevent flooding. And we just don't disseminate that information quickly enough. So I do think that when we have complex issues to solve, public sector absolutely needs to be involved, but we should invite the not-for-profit sector and the private sector in to do their part as well, because that's how we're going to really, really solve some of the issues. Jessica mentioned certainly apartment buildings and heat and the devastation that can happen, particularly with vulnerable people. And in University-Rosedale, we have a number of apartment buildings, so that is a huge concern. And some municipalities now have a position in the municipality called a chief heat officer, and kind of a cool job title, but recognizing that there are things we can do to mitigate the impacts of this extreme weather that we're having, and that we need to do that. And those are the things, like Jessica said, that make me feel hopeful. Like there are ideas. Trees is one of them, absolutely. And it's one of those really odd situations, because having a couple trees in extreme weather is actually really devastating. But if you have a forest, it's protective. And so, we can certainly build more trees, and, the Ontario government has now committed to doing 800 million in the next 8 years to be able to help with that tree canopy. But this is an area also where we have growing innovation. We have such an innovative and entrepreneurial mindset. You've said right here, you have climate ventures here at CSI. There are bright people that are figuring this out. So I think the role of government is, how do we unleash those ideas, help get them started, seed fund them, catalyze them, help them grow so that they can actually be a part of the solution for us.
Your timing is like impeccable. I don't know how you do it. That's
I
amazing.
follow instructions
Yeah,
like
very
QT.
good, very good.
I was in Army Cadets as a kid. I don't know. I just...
I just, before you go, Diane, one of the things that I just can't, thinking about the way that small businesses and emerging business and the climate ventures that we're seeing emerging out of just CSI, never mind all of the other accelerators, raises so many issues around economic policy, what we're investing in, how come we become obsessed with the job instead of the actual impact. Anyway, there will be another debate or town hall that we're hoping to put together that we'll be doing actually in Spadina, Fort York, because, we have 2 buildings, therefore 2 ridings. And that's where we're going to be digging into social... Okay, really, I promise we will. Digging into social innovation and the social economy. And really, one of the things that we didn't talk about today, but that we need to really think about, is how our tech funding, our business acceleration funding, is actually being used in that intersectionality. We have to bring more intention to how we integrate business development, innovation, and social impact. Anyway, that's just a lovely little segue for you, Diane. Go ahead, you got the final word.
Right. Well, I want to go back to the question you asked, because I think it's really important. You asked how the provincial government can strengthen adaptation among the public sector. And we actually have quite a bit of data on this. The Insurance Bureau of Canada partnered with the Federation of Canadian Municipalities to look at what municipalities need right now for adaptation, and it's roughly $2 billion a year. So you'll see in our roadmap to net zero, we have a dedicated levy, half of it from fees on parking and use of cars, and half of it from the use of gas in heating in buildings, to fund that $2 billion a year, so that there is money to go to municipalities and schools and hospitals, all of whom are being told now they have to prepare, and none of whom are being provided with money. So dedicated adaptation funding is really critical. It's critical in both directions. On the one hand, it's important that we have money for adaptation and that all the money doesn't go to mitigation. But the bigger risk is that as adaptation needs grow, it will cannibalize the money that could reduce our emissions, and we'll be spending all our money just running after the disaster and not being able to get ahead of it. So dedicated adaptation funding, really important. We have to start with a vulnerability assessment. Again, that's one of the things I called for in my last climate report. We need to know where our risks are. We can guess, but actually we need to know. And when you do the studies, very often we find, as they did in the UK, that the needs are different than you think. The second thing we need is standards for what to build. Not only what we build new, but also how to keep working what we have already. And you just have to look around in University-Rosedale. We've got big differences in different parts of the riding. I mean, we have parts of the riding, Rosedale, for example, which is not going to be as vulnerable to floods and heat because it's leafy, it's green, there's lots of public spaces, things are spread out, and it's comparatively high. There are other parts of the riding, more to the south and the west, where the tree canopy is very scarce, where the air pollution is much worse. We worked with the University of Toronto last year, and again, to look at air quality, much worse in the poorer parts of the riding, and especially people on the busy streets. So we need to be context sensitive, we need to be equity sensitive, and we need to put the resources forward. And we've got all of those in our roadmap to net zero.
Nice.
We do know that doing this can again help make things better. If we talked about forests, Andrea. So one of the things we looked at was, what can you do with a parking lot? We know that parking lots do an enormous amount of damage to municipal areas. They're bad for business. They're bad for air quality. Most of them we should get rid of. One of the things we can do with them is turn them into mini forests. And there's a process being developed in Japan where you can rapidly get a healthy mini forest in an area just the size of a small parking lot, which improves air quality, reduces heat, and is especially important in the trees-at desert parts of the city. The poorer parts of the city deserve it, need it, and we could do it fast. Again, we need things that are fast, cheap, and transformative, and they would make our life better. We could do it right now.
Perfect. Thank you, Diane. I'm just going to say it's a Japanese, it's the Mazakawi method, and it's about intensified farming. And one of the most interesting innovations that I've heard of lately is about creating food forests with people who are psychiatric and mental health sufferers. And there's actually this really exciting new nonprofit organization that is coming together with psychiatry and nature and looking at how the act of stewarding these forests is actually transforming mental health. An example of this intersectionality. Anyway, I should be wrapping up, but I'm going to let each of you ask the question. So here's what's interesting. These three incredible women are going to be going to all of these different events at the same time. They know things about each other that we don't know yet. And so I'm curious to hear what each of your questions is, and I'm not going to get you to answer yet. I'm just interested in hearing your questions for each other, and then we'll pick one because we don't have enough time. But I am curious. Diane, if you could ask these two women one question, briefly, very briefly, what would that question be?
If you're not elected, how will you pursue this agenda after?
Ooh, sweet. Okay, that's sweet. That's juicy. Okay, Jessica, what do you got as a question for these two wonderful women?
What do we have in common when we're looking at our climate plans?
Wow, nice. All right, go ahead, Andrea.
I was trying to think about what that web app is, where you put something and then you can like someone else's and it moves it to the top. Because I like Diane's, actually. I thought that was really good. I'm happy today. But Jessica's was good too. Happy to answer either of them.
I think this is great. And I think Jessica's is beautiful in the sense of that is how you open up. That's how you should open up every conversation. Am I wrong? It's perfect. It's how we build consensus and collaboration. But I'm actually super interested. You +1 to hers. So what will you do, Jessica, if you don't get elected to pursue this agenda?
To pursue this agenda, I
Not
was
in
thinking that I'd say sorry to my husband for working non-stop for 5 years. Yeah, what would I do? Before I did this job as an MPP, I was, like I said, a community organizer and executive director, mainly working in political activism circles. I would take a break. I might travel and visit my mum in Australia, and then I'd go straight back to doing that work. It's all I've ever done. It's who I am. It's my essence. I can't imagine doing anything else. And I actually see this work as an extension of that. They're very similar. That's what I've used my office for. That's what I'd continue to do. But right now I am really focused on continuing to hold this position. I love it. And I'd love to continue to have another 4 years to really get stuff done with the residents of University-Rosedale. We've done a lot, and there's a lot more. There's so much more we need to get done.
Gorgeous. What a beautiful answer. Gorgeous. All right. How about you, Andrea?
So about 5 years ago, I created a personal mission statement. Trying to direct my varied and CV and try to make sense of it. But it was really focused on creating, amplifying, and executing ideas that help to build a better world. And so, kind of copying Jessica a little bit, but with a quote. And to say, I think right now, timing is everything. I think now is the right time for me to be in politics and try to pursue it this way. But this is only one way. There are many other ways, and so I expect to continue. If we, only one of us will be elected. I think the poor Conservative guy's out of luck. And I'm going to be pretty pleased to work with both of these women in any configuration that happens.
Beautiful. That's gorgeous. Diane, do you want to answer your own question?
Well, I haven't decided yet. I mean, obviously I could go back to running my law practice and make a lot more money. But the top priority for me, I have children and grandchildren. And my eldest grandson is 8. He is pretty close to understanding what we've done. And when he turns to me and says, "How did you let this happen to me, to us, to the world?" I need to be able to tell him that I did everything humanly possible. So I will keep looking for every chink, every opportunity for as long as body and mind hold out. Because we broke it, and we should be fixing it.
Beautiful. Thank you. Stefan, do you have any final word or comment? Because I'm going to wrap this baby up.
No, just thank you so much we had about 70 folks who joined online. So thank you to all those people who joined online. We were wonderful questions and engagement. And yeah, over to you, Tanya.
Fabulous. So I just want to say, you women make it so easy. You're fantastic. You're smart. You're informed. You had great people making sure you could answer that agriculture question. So well done, teams, to make sure that they knew what they were talking about. Truly, it gives me hope to see such extraordinary leaders being willing to step into the political arena. I know for myself, it terrifies me. I have very thin skin. And I just want to invite and appreciate each of you for your leadership, both in this race, but also for all of the work that you do. I know for myself, I've been doing this for about 30 plus years. I swear I'm only 36, I swear. And I know that we have between us, between just on this panel, 100 years of experience and 500 years of passion and commitment. And I truly, truly appreciate each of you and your contributions. It's not easy work. And so whether you are elected or not elected, I want you to feel seen, heard, and supported, because this is not easy, but we do have your back, even though you probably don't feel like it ever. So also just, yeah, there you go, say that. Yes. Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. It's true, I know it. And I want to thank all of you who came out and risked your life by coming to CSI in real life. There are drinks at the back if you'd like to grab a glass of wine and continue to chat with our incredible candidates here in person. And I think we've even figured out, I'm not sure if you're going to do a little roundtable conversation where you can have Diane talk to the way more people online than offline. I just also want to say an extraordinary vote of gratitude to Emile, who actually pulled it off. Yes! You did it! Well done. So please, please, please stay around, chat with the candidates, and thank you all so very much for coming, and thank you for all of your work.
Great job moderating, Tanya.
Thanks,
You did
guys.
a fabulous job. We have your back.
Yay! I'll do it again. I'll do it again. Thanks so much. Oh, thank you. Hold on.
Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. And when you do subscribe, hit the little notification bell so you never miss out on any of our content. If you'd also like more, you can find us on our other social media platforms. And if you want even more, you can look at our website.